Okay, people are just joining us now for our latest Downtown Den event, and we're joined by the wonderful Chief Executive of Manchester City Council, Joanne Roney. Joanne and I were just reflecting on the fact that today we had planned to be at the Lowry Hotel, having a leaders' lunch and perhaps something sparkling in the glass. Unfortunately, Joe, national lockdowns come along and scuppered our original plans, but nonetheless, delighted to see you. And just before we get into a conversation about how Manchester's planning to bounce back from all this, I just wanted to ask you, as an individual and a senior decision maker in the city, obviously lots of other jobs to do as well as the usual stuff as a chief executive of the council, how you've been managing for the last 6, 7, 8 months.
How have I been managing? I guess I'm fine. It's difficult for everybody. I mean, if I say I'm busy, it's an understatement. It's been pretty relentless. And it's multifaceted, isn't it? You're absolutely right. You know, I've got kind of core businesses to run alongside running an emergency, alongside planning for recovery, extensive networking going on with government and liaison with government, lots of joint work. So incredibly busy. But I'm okay. You know, I think by now people should know that I'm fairly resilient. I think you know this has been nothing but kind of challenging 4 years in the role now, and I think I've had pretty much everything that can be thrown at me. So I think I'm pretty resilient. But we all have to be mindful of that, don't we? We all have to be careful about looking after ourselves. And I don't get a break. It has been full on. It just is. So I appreciate all the wine and Zoom meetings that I have to kind of stay connected to colleagues and get the support from people. And you know, what's Manchester if it isn't just the most amazing place for partnerships and connections? And you know, it doesn't have to be in person, does it? There's Twitter support, there's people reaching out to me, there's opportunity to engage in culture online. So, you know, it's fine. You just have to be mindful of the need to take a break every now and again.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, as I was saying to you before we kicked off, the always, you know, thing I'm mindful of is who motivates the motivators. Because, you know, it can be a lonely place at times, those leadership roles, and you're having to take some big decisions. And ordinarily, you're surrounded by your team physically, and that gives you a degree of comfort, and there's touch points that are much easier to reach out to. So, you know, I do really feel for the people who are in positions such as yourselves. And even, you know, the government have taken a lot of criticism, and I've joined in with some of that. But nonetheless, I'm glad I'm not in the position they're in and the crisis that they're facing at the moment. So I just wanted to ask, and you know, I knew what the answer would be because you're a glass half full sort of gal, but nonetheless, you know, just be conscious of the fact that there's lots of people in the downtown network who are loving what you do, and we're here to support you. So, so let's move on to, we're going to try and keep as upbeat as we can today. And we want to look ahead to 2021, when we hope, everything crossed, that we're coming out of this thing in a positive way. And listen, if the North and the economy of the North and the Northern Powerhouse is to mean anything, then for me, Manchester has got to be at the heart of that, because it is the powerhouse within the powerhouse. It's the city that over the last 25, 30 years has consistently delivered, both in terms of regeneration projects, economic growth, and I know inclusivity is a big part of the agenda that you've been pursuing, Joe. The recovery plan will be launched in a couple of weeks' time. Tell us the things that are exciting you and what you think ought to be prioritised as far as the city is concerned.
So, couple of things. I mean, you know, the city has had a tough year, hasn't it? You know, let's start by acknowledging the level of deaths that have occurred in this city and how devastating the impact of COVID has been on our communities in all facets, really, from spiking in unemployment, from the anxiety of people being furloughed, right through to ill health, poor health, caring for people, the devastation that's hit our families. And of course, alongside all of that has been a slowing down of our trajectory of growth, which you're right, we were, up there flying outside of London, fastest GDP growing. So this has been a tough year, and what we have to do is look forward and create the foundations now for what's going to happen for next year. So you're right, we're launching the economic and investment plan next end of this month, I think, which is looking forward to that. I'm not going to give the headlines away. That's a secret, so people will have to come and join us again to do that. But you can, if I tell you that, we're talking here about £800 million worth of investments that we're looking for. We've had a rethink, as you would expect, about our strategy, which is so zero carbon and green growth will feature large. Activity to return to the city, as we're calling it, bringing people back, getting those businesses, getting that footfall up. Clearly, we're going to build on our strength sectors and seek to energise and increase those areas where we've got real talent, real understanding and depth and calibre of anchor institutions, really, particularly around life sciences, work with the universities, but other strength sectors. Build on our partnerships, as you would expect. I said at the start, it's the extent and the nature of our partnerships that keeps not just me personally buoyant and my team buoyant, but the city buoyant. And we don't take them for granted. And partnerships at the heart of where we'll go next. And of course, our other strength, which is we deliver. So I'm really chuffed to see that in setting out our economic and investment plan that's coming up, we'll also be updating on progress that we've made with our existing pipeline. And there's some phenomenally exciting stuff in there, not least North Manchester, which, you said quite rightly, my priority when I came here was around inclusive growth, if we call it that, which was about our economic growth reaching the people who were the most deprived and the people who in this city who were struggling the most. That has to be the north of Manchester. So the announcement around joining up the Northern Gateway housing development with the announcement on a new hospital, the opportunity to create a completely new educational facility, training development, innovation centre linked to health, as well as build a new hospital. That is going to be so exciting. And that's all underpinned by about 30 million quid's worth of investment going into skills. So, I'm not just upbeat because everybody says we need to be upbeat. I think I'm feeling pretty upbeat because we've done the work in this year to really consolidate our foundations, really energise our capacity and our pace and our pipeline, and more details at the end of the month.
Yeah, and much room for optimism. I just want to stay for a moment on this inclusive agenda because, as I say, it's certainly something that you've been prioritising since you arrived as chief executive in the city, and I just wonder, out of all bad things come good, whether this does give us an opportunity of some resetting of agendas.
Yeah, it's got to be.
So, we're being promised by the government a big investment into skills and training, and if we can marry the two, the new opportunities that are coming down the line, and that investment into skills and training. And again, I know you're at the heart of the discussion in Greater Manchester over this, so you'll be thinking about this. That for me, Joanne, would be a huge step forward if we can finally get to grips with that gap that we've been talking about for too long now.
Yeah, definitely. I mentioned at the start that a lot of the time I'm spending is working with government, and it is about trying to help government kind of reset their national programmes with a degree of flexibility that we can deliver big change here in the city. you're right. I've just said earlier, we've got about 30 million worth of projects going on in the city around skills. A lot of stuff targeted to young people, but also adult education and reskilling, particularly around digital skills. I was just this morning, I was actually in the Employment Skills Partnership with Greater Manchester, and we were looking at vacancies. We do a vacancy analysis here, um, as well as looking at universal credit claimants and job losses. We also look at business births and business deaths in the city. So I was just looking at all this data this morning, and we're advertising in the city around about 6,000 vacancies still. So it's slightly dipped, but it's been fairly consistent since kind of September time. Most of those vacancies require digital skills. Now, we have got to upskill quickly. How many, I've lost track now of how many people I've got on furlough, but it's a significant 30 odd thousand furloughed. Some of those people are not going to be returning to jobs in sectors that are thriving, particularly some aspects of retail and others. The assisting them to get reskilled into the new jobs has got to be our number one priority, and that's what we're on with. And there is a challenge about saying we all know that the skills system for employers is so complicated.
Yeah.
It's so complicated. For young people to find their way into jobs and then try and work through their pathways to careers is just ridiculously difficult. So I have to say I am still pushing with government to say initiatives like Kickstart are helpful, great, but they're not the end game.
Yeah.
Kickstart is a 6-month placement for a young person to get a feel for work. Great. I want them to understand how that Kickstart translates to a job. Government can't do that. Manchester can do that. And I was just looking at the stats today. I think we've had 79 Kickstart vacancies advertised. We had somewhere in the region of 2,000 people apply for them. You know, that demand is out there, and businesses have been brilliant about working with us, and we've got to knit these programs together across Greater Manchester really to make to create those pathways. So skills will be huge.
And I'm with you, Joe. I think one of the problems that we've had in the past is that, we get from Whitehall handed down these one-size-fits-all funding packages. If we can get more devolution into that area, then for me, that's going to be a winner. And if, again, this pandemic's proved anything, it's where you can get local decision-making and local action, which has the greatest effect. And in that skills agenda, it's got to be the next thing that gets a huge devolve push as far as I'm concerned.
It needs businesses to be saying that, Frank. I'm saying it, politicians locally, Andy Burnhams, Richard Leese, all the local leadership will be saying that, but nothing's louder than the voice of business that can say, we know how to make this work in our combined authority areas, our regional areas. So yes, please bang the drum for more devolution, because we can do it at pace here, we can make a difference here, but we do need that flexibility and we do need those devolved responsibilities on skills.
Yeah. Now, in your comments about the optimism that we feel for 2021, you rightly mentioned that pre-pandemic, lots of the projects that we were planning were up and running and have continued, actually, despite the fact that we've had challenges. And so, if you think of those projects that will be completed, others that will be coming on stream, we're quite right to, as I say, have a glass half full conversation today. But within those initiatives, how important is the connectivity infrastructure conversations that we've had previously, and what sense do you get from the conversations you have with government about those big projects such as HS2 and Northern Powerhouse Rail?
So sorry, Frank, my connection went a bit wobbly then. I think I heard you say where are we on our connectivity points around Northern Powerhouse Rail, High Speed 2, and as you say, infrastructure being key. So there is progress. I mean, certainly we've made some progress on HS2, although we still haven't landed Piccadilly quite as we would like. But those projects are increasing. I think I said to you earlier off camera that one of the meetings I'm not doing, because I'm doing this meeting, is a meeting with Eamon around transport. So I probably am missing something deeply significant, who knows. But we are still pushing away, I think, with the transport funding. And we were conscious that London got a big announcement recently around transport infrastructure funding. So very much an ask of us to resolve our connectivity around Northern Powerhouse Rail and to accelerate that. In other kind of infrastructure work, you're right, our projects, particularly around commercial and resi in the city centre, have continued, and our pipeline equally strong. And interestingly, rent levels, I think we've seen about a 1.8% drop. London is talking about a kind of 7-8% drop in the city. We're not at that level. Out of city, even rent levels slightly increasing for out of city, resi and commercial, interestingly. So we're holding up on construction, and thanks to all colleagues associated with that. Really good to see our big projects. And as I've said, I guess in the economic investment plan that will come out, we'll talk some more about our infrastructure asks. Particularly, we've got city centre transport infrastructure plans coming out, and we're doing stuff around public spaces and kind of redesigning elements of the city centre. Yesterday, we announced some proposals for Ancoats to start to do feasibility study for making that kind of car-free part of the city, with completely different thinking around how we do connectivity around the city centre coming from Ancoats. So a lot to go at there. And I know you always ask me this point about the connectivity isn't just Manchester. So it's the Manchester Salford city centre working, and the connections, including waterways between us. And then it's the connections to other core cities, isn't it? And particularly Liverpool, Leeds,
Yes.
making sure we get those Liverpool Leeds axes working properly, and that does require rail link, that's a sector that's been devastated by COVID in terms of fare box. Aviation and transport massively hit. So there has to be some government support given to those sectors. There has to be.
Yeah, and you mentioned aviation then, of course, our international airport, and when I say our, I mean the Northern Powerhouse, is Manchester. And it's, I can't remember the number, but it's a huge one in terms of its losses on a
Oh
weekly
yeah,
basis at the moment. And of
yeah.
course, traditional airports such as Liverpool are suffering the same way, Leeds, Bradford. But Manchester, as I say, is the international hub for the North. So again, Joe, I am aware that conversations are taking place with government. And I think, hats off to the aviation sector. Some of the asks are actually not handouts. It's just simply saying, let's have an even playing field with some of our competitor airports across the globe.
That's right. And I think, but with both sectors really, there's a recognition that this isn't a quick fix. You don't just sort of turn back on airports, do you? That's not how it works. You don't just open them. It needs a long-term solution, and so I think there's quite a lot of conversations taking place with government around how we long-term fund and finance. And as you say, it's not about bailouts, it's about thinking through proper long-term structural financing for airports to grow their capacity, come back on stream. I feel for them, and of course, clearly we've got a vested interest in the airport, not just on the basis of its economic significance, but it's a huge. The airport provides a dividend to the city council that underpins the services that we deliver. The loss of the airport dividend has hit us hard. We're one of the most affected councils in the country for loss of income. And colleagues may have seen the budget report that was presented yesterday to our executive, which is just frightening. The amount of money that we've got to find through direct cuts to services. including job losses at a time when actually I can't think my services have been under anywhere near as much pressure, and yet here we are having to start conversations around job losses. These things are connected. A
Yes.
strong council with a strong revenue base that can create the conditions for economic growth in this city is so important, and it's been, we've been intertwined, haven't we? It's the strength of Manchester. So yeah, airport success and absolutely crucial to the region, to UK PLC actually, and same connectivity of rail,
Mm.
equally important for me.
Yeah, and I think it's those international visitors that are such a huge part of the visitor economy that is important, as you say, for the whole of the north. They often,
Yeah,
they will start their journey in Manchester, but they'll visit the
yeah,
lakes, they'll go to Lancashire, they'll come to Liverpool and Leeds and so on and so
yeah.
forth. It is a crucial
We need
part
the foot.
of the
We
whole
need the
ecosystem.
and we need the football back.
We do, yeah, we do. Although the last three results, I'm not as keen as I was early in the season, but we get back to that later, perhaps. But culture actually is something that's been on the agenda overnight because the former Northern Powerhouse Minister, Jake Berry, I feel a bit of sympathy for him actually, because I think the message he was trying to get across to his colleagues in London was that there is more to life than the opera. I don't think he was suggesting that nobody in Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, or wherever doesn't enjoy the finer things of life. But nonetheless, I think he was trying to make the point that Accrington Stanley to some people is more important than the Royal Ballet. Nonetheless, Manchester has developed a whole range of diverse cultural offers. Manchester International Festival being the jewel in the crown, but many other things aside. And again, Joanne, I know that the council contribute both in terms of resource and cash, working in partnership with the private sector. It's those sort of things, I think, that are often underestimated in terms
Oh,
of
yeah.
how we drive economies forward, because the attraction of a place like Manchester isn't just the fact that they've got nice shiny office buildings and nice restaurants and bars. It's that cultural aspect of life in the city, isn't it? And we've got to find a way of convincing government that those things are worth funding too.
Uh, couldn't agree more. And I probably won't comment on government communications at the moment. There's enough coverage about that going on today. I'll leave that for others to determine. But yes, I agree, and that's why the council's continued with its investment and indeed increased it to compensate for the impact of COVID in the factory, which is this is going to be one hell of an iconic venue. Internationally, it's going to be a complete game changer. I understand people in the current context struggling to understand why we're spending money in culture, but it's as you said, Frank. Our cultural offer is so integral to this city, and any global vibrant city needs to have a range of offers and opportunities for people, doesn't it? That's the point of being a globally significant vibrant city, that you come and visit. It needs to have something for everybody, and I think culture is at the heart of that. We've got some fantastic cultural organisations, grassroots, right down to neighbourhood grassroots activity, right up to iconic events and globally significant award-winning design venues like the Factory will be. And we've got to preserve that. We've got to keep that. So another part of kind of our lobbying to government in the shape of the comprehensive spending review is to say that, and I think that is what Jake was trying to
Yeah.
articulate, which is that culture is as important to economic recovery as construction or manufacturing, our universities. It's all part of the DNA, and it's part of levelling up the north. The difference between culture in the north and the south is actually the level of private investment that goes into the south, or indeed levels of government equity that goes into the south. It is disproportionate to what goes into the north.
And Joe, in terms of the cultural sector in particular, are desperate to get people back into the venues when we do come out of lockdown. Of course, that's been very difficult, very challenging with social distancing. And so the news earlier this week that there is potentially a vaccine on the horizon has been welcomed by all of us. We're keeping everything crossed that the final results of the trials are as positive as the initial results that have been announced. So you, I know, will have been at the forefront of the conversations about how we can get these vaccines into the population and roll it out. Now, how, given the problems that we've experienced so far, confident are we that we can get a system and a process in place that we can, let's face it, get this thing into the community in a way that we failed with track and trace. Let's be honest about it. We've just not been able to get that right.
So, I mean, this is very live. People will have seen the announcements came out. Was it Sunday? I don't know. I don't have a weekend anymore. It all kind of blurs. A few days ago. So this is very, very live for us about how we're going to roll out the lateral test vaccines. And obviously, I think I've had daily conversations with my counterpart Tony Reeves in Liverpool, and have to say, hats off to Liverpool. Very bold, ambitious mass testing programme. I'm very glad they've gone first, because we can learn from them, and hats off to them. And genuinely, Liverpool, I really, really want this to be a success for Liverpool. Genuinely, anything we can do to support Liverpool, we will. But we're watching and listening and learning as we go from them. I think one of the challenges we've got is, my first one is I'm mandated to do mass testing on students. So our focus right now, that's kind of required of us, that we have to mass test students over December, January. So that's our focus right now. I think then we'll be thinking about mass testing the students. I agree with you. We've got to sort track and trace and isolate out as part of that, and then the vaccine programme will roll out in the criteria that's been pretty much determined by government, really, in terms of saying. I am interested to see what more we can do around vaccines, going back to your point about whether there's a way to link vaccines or testing to the opening of venues, particularly those venues that have been closed. I think that's a very live conversation that we're having with government. Your question was around the logistics of this. I can't tell you how complicated this kind of work is through the government. Liverpool did get the armed forces support rolled into. I think there is a question about whether that capacity can exist everywhere. So what the capacity is going to be, and more information will follow. But we're full. But it has to be a whole, doesn't it? It has to be track, trace. It has to be test, track, trace, isolate, and current period.
Sorry, Joe, we're just breaking up a little there in terms of the connection, but I did get the gist of what you were saying. So basically, I think that if we could get into a situation where we can get the vaccine rollout relatively quickly, the sector that's been hit hardest, being the front line of all this, but then obviously has a knock-on effect right through the economy, but it has been hospitality. And again, that's an area where Manchester has thrived in recent years. What are you picking up from that sector? Because I know you're having conversations and you're talking to government again about what levels of support there needs to be at particular times. Do you think there's a case to be made, even as we start to return, for continued targeted support at those sectors that have been particularly hardest hit?
Sorry, Frank, I think my internet connection's gone a bit wobbly. I missed the end of that.
I'm just asking, Joanne, whether representations are being made to continue that targeted support for sectors that have been particularly hardest hit, such as hospitality.
Yeah, well, again, we're waiting. We have to plan now for what happens on the 2nd of December, where those restrictions are lifted. And as you'll know, the announcement is that we go back into tiers. We're still trying to work with government to determine what tier we would be in and what the criteria for determining it is. I have to say this is partly affected by our hospitals are under real pressure in the northwest, real difficulty. So it's a conversation that we're having now about determining which tier we go into and what restrictions do need to be in force, and also what else we can do about rolling out the mass testing programme to link to those tiers. I am desperate to see business open again. I am desperate to see the city back on its feet again. But we of course are measuring this with the spread of a virus that's killing people, and our hospitals are at capacity. So we have to strike a balanced approach to this. But that's what we're working on with government now. No decisions yet. There are genuinely no decisions yet. And Manchester's rate is falling. There are some hotspots around GM still. I know Liverpool's has fallen quite drastically, actually, through the mass testing programme. So, if we can link these things together and give an assurance that we are going to beat this virus, let's push to get our economies working.
And then when we do return, and as I say, we're all hoping that's going to be at the very latest spring, and we start to look forward to some of these developments and projects that you've talked about, we are unfortunately going to see casualties in those retail and hospitality sectors. Again, Joanne, I know that conversations have been had through Marketing Manchester and others about how we can creatively start to use some of that vacant space. Any sort of thoughts yourself on that?
Well, not that's thought up enough to kind of announce it at this stage, but and it's interesting, isn't it? We are watching the business births and we call it business mortality and business births, if that's the right phrase. Yeah. And it's interesting because in the city, we've lost 157 businesses, but we've seen 133 start up. So trying to get a full understanding about which aspects of retail will suffer in what areas, whether I'm concerned with the city centre or am I concerned with district centres. What do we do to repurpose some of our out of city areas as a priority if the city's holding up? What do we repurpose into food and beverage if that still seems to be going strong? We've still got strong demand for hotels as well. So as I said, kind of, if one of the things that we're thinking about is the return to the city, it's what's going to be different about the city if we return to it. I might not be speaking for everybody on the call, but I think those of us who've been, kind of away from work, there's a lot of people said people wouldn't be returning to work. My intelligence is people are now fed up of working from home with their dodgy internet connections and are missing their colleagues and, flexible work patterns, yes, but I think there is a desire to come back to work. I think that kind of novelty of the first lockdown wore off. And so people are thinking differently. And I think everybody's sick to death with being interrupted in meetings with the doorbell ringing because Amazon parcels have arrived. There's something there about we want to get into shops and feel the quality and touch the stuff again. So we're open to repurposing. We're looking at what packages we can put together to help businesses readjust and to rethink their model of service delivery. And repurposing of space, but I can't kind of say at this stage exactly what it will be.
I'm absolutely with you in terms of, this phrase that's been coined by Lisa Morton at RZPR, Great Manchester Agency, of course, working from work. And I think
she's right.
In the summer when you were looking out on the sun and you perhaps get out into your garden or at least go for a nice walk, it's a very different experience in the middle of winter when you're locked down, isn't it? So
it is.
I think there has a review of people's position on that, let's say.
I think it's I think it's a changing. I mean, there are some aspects that I think we'll want to keep. I do think there's a degree of flexible working. I think the car usage point will be an interesting one to see. Slightly increased in the city, but whether that stays, I don't know. If we can get public transport, as I've said, if we can invest in that, I think there is probably less people needing to use their car. If they can work flexibly with decent public transport, they probably will. I, I think there is this point though about Manchester as a city. We do business through conversation, don't we?
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
do business by coming together, networking, building supply chains, talking to each other, sharing perspectives, equally investing time and energy in shaping the future. You ain't doing that over Zoom calls forever. Where we need to get back in the rooms, and I think we want to. I think it's in the DNA of the city, and I don't mean it just as Manchester the party city. I think it's in the way we do business in the city.
Absolutely.
And so I think the return to city I think we're ready for it. I think we're ready to come back and start to reimagining our city and reinventing it.
Okay. Let's go slightly back on a conversation. We talked broadly about training, skills, and that agenda. But again, listen, your number one passion, I think, is probably education, and making sure that our kids get proper schooling. And again, one of your biggest challenges was an education offer that did need to be improved. I think it's fair to say. And listen, if there's an area where we've had difficulties and challenges over the last 9 months, it's been that area, hasn't it? Education. Now the kids are in school at the moment. We hope that continues. Question marks over exams perhaps next year. But again, Joanne, I think that we've got to start to think now about more innovative ways in which we can help this generation of children catch up. It's great that they're back in school now, but they're not going to be able to get those 6 months back unless we start to deliver something a little bit different going forward.
Yeah, it's a very, very live conversation. We've just done some analysis around COVID impacts on children and the absence from school point. And I think a national average was around 4% of children losing time from school. In Greater Manchester, it's 12%. And that's, as you say, the impact on those 6 months. Not every child being off for 6 months, and it's not all about children having COVID. It's about some of them. It's some of them being schools having to shut temporarily or classrooms having to shut. We're trying to rethink how we manage schools in the current situation. I should start by saying our schools have been absolutely fantastic. There's so many unsung heroes in this pandemic. Carers and schools would be up there for me alongside NHS. I think the schools have been stunning, doing everything they can. But those young people have lost a lot of time, and we have got to help them get that back. So I think you're right. We need to be rethinking what we can do to accelerate access to, and I think we're back to schools, business partnerships, getting in there when the time's right to re-galvanise that connectivity back with our schools and businesses will be so important for us. It was fantastic to see Marcus come out and talk about, on top of everything else, children going hungry during Christmas and then half term February. Just good to see government listened to that groundswell of opinion that said, hang on a minute here, we've got some of the most disadvantaged and deprived children in the country, and we need to be investing in them. And let's start by giving them food to sustain them. Then we'll educate and learn and teach and expose them. And I think it's voices again to government directly from businesses and others that calls for that commitment. On exams, I think there is a real national challenge going on to say, don't leave this till the last minute. Wales have already come out. Scotland will be coming out in terms of exams next year. Let's take the pressure off our young people and be clear what's expected of them. And then let us start to, as you say, re-energise and galvanise education and the world of work for our young people. They are the most disadvantaged, and they are actually the hardest hit from the economic impact of COVID. The people who are unemployed, the people who are most furloughed, it's young people.
And Joanna, again, I think this takes back into the conversation around devolution, but perhaps just thinking about this in a more strategic way now. And I've just noticed Patrick's put in the chat room there. If anyone else got any questions who's tuning in today, please put them in the chat room. We'll put them to Joanne. But Leeds are about to do their devolution bit. They finally got a deal over the line. Talking to a very buoyant Tom Reardon, who I think has lived and breathed for the last 6 years, trying to get a West Yorkshire or some sort of devolution deal for Yorkshire in place. You were probably at the start of those conversations. So, but on a serious note here, if you've got that West Yorkshire Authority, you've got the Sheffield City region with Dan Jarvis, you've got Andy in Manchester, you've got Steve Rodder in Liverpool. What a powerful group of people to actually start to facilitate those conversations with Whitehall, to say, these are the challenges. You talked about them all today, Joanne, and they're all strategic, aren't they?
Yeah.
The sport, the connectivity, the economic development, the education, the skills and training. If we can create something that is applicable and relevant to the north, and that will look different in Liverpool to it does in Manchester to it does in Leeds, but it's a far more sensible approach and a much better investment than actually just throwing, as I said earlier, this one-size-fits-all approach that we've had to put up with for years. So again, the question, I suppose, is, are we feeling from Whitehall, given where we are right now, more of an appetite to start taking those sort of conversations seriously? Because I'm frustrated at the lack of progress of devolution, Joanne. I know we've got the GM and we've got things happening in Liverpool, but we just need more power, resource and responsibility, in my view.
So for the past 6-8 months, I've been part of a national local economy recovery group, which is a cross-government group that, in parallel to dealing with the kind of first phase of the pandemic, have been working on policy papers to go to ministers to talk about how we do the recovery. And it's been quite interesting being on a national group because you do see that, of course, the whole of the UK is not covered with combined authority type models or mayoral models. And what's emerged from that group, interestingly, is how strong we are in the north with the arrangements that we've got. And it's strengthened by the Yorkshire arrangement to come on board. And it's been really clear to me that although we have local differences, we have more in common in terms of we know that greater devolution, flexibility of funding. So we've been working, particularly the northern cities, this is myself, Liverpool, Leeds and Newcastle and Sheffield, have been pulling together some real thought pieces and policy papers to go in front of ministers that talk about place-based flexible budgets that can come to us to deliver national outcomes, but with a pot of money and a flexibility that will turn into local programmes and will commission and will deliver it. We have been doing this policy work on skills and place-based with the two that we led on in the north, really, because they're the things that matter to us the most. I'm not saying that obviously tourism, international trade, these all matter, but if we could get growth, place-based growth, and we could get skills handed over to us with greater devolution, we'd start to make the change that we want to see. So just to assure people that we've been doing that policy thinking, that's strategic and evidence-based. So absolutely collating back to government the evidence of what we're able to achieve through local programmes versus government's achievement on national programmes. We outstrip them. We outstrip them on Future Jobs Fund. We outstrip them on apprenticeships. We've been really, really evidence-basing and arguing those points, and clearly supported by Andy and politicians, the leaders. But the comprehensive spending review is going to be interesting because all of this work has led to meetings with ministers and policy propositions being put to government, and we'll wait and see where that leads us in terms of comprehensive spending review. But that's the work I've been doing at night.
That's been during your spare time.
In my spare time.
So let's just turn to the questions in the chat room. We've one for Lisa. I mentioned Lisa earlier, of course. So, Joanne, which of your own personal values have been most important to you over the past 8 months, and have you had to compromise any of the face of navigating a situation that nothing could have prepared you for as a leader?
Oh gosh, what can I say about that, Lisa? Let me just have a drink a minute.
I bet you there's vodka in that mug.
Yeah, neat vodka. What have I? Personal values. I mean, I think my number one personal value would be about integrity. Partially because I'm not polished enough to be anything other than what you see is what you get, and because of my upbringing and where I come from, and I've told people before about my journey to be where I am. I'm very clear where my values are and what matters to me, and it is about making that difference to people, particularly the stuff around the inclusive growth, as we've talked about. That's what motivates me and drives me and gives me the energy to do 14-hour days for 6 months, because we have to make a difference here. We have to get through this and make a difference. One of the situations I'm going to have to say it because it's kind of in my head was clearly the being alongside Andy with the negotiation with government around the business support package to come to GM as we were going into lockdown, and that was relentless negotiation. It was myself and Eamon were leading the negotiations, clearly mandated by leaders and Andy, but we were the ones who were in the room with an army of civil servants, demonstrating our case, our argument, our rationale, our evidence. It was tough to be confronted with government not agreeing with what we were saying, but without having an economic impact of their own or a counter argument of their own. I mean, this is not to fall out with civil servants. They're under incredible pressure as well. They're doing their own job. But those negotiations, I think my highlight has to be the phone call I got at 10:30 after a day of negotiation. We finished, got a phone call at 10:30 to reconvene the Zoom meeting where I'm negotiating business support packages in my pajamas, I'm thinking, with Eamon. It was bizarre. I was feeling kind of like, hang on a minute, what am I doing here? I'm in my pajamas at 10:30 on a Saturday night. And then, of course, the real issue was to have not got a deal, only for the package that we'd been arguing about to then be announced as a national scheme. I found that disingenuous, actually, and I found that hard personally. That's not against any of the civil servants in the room, who I think were as equally surprised as we were, really. I'm not a politician. My job is to deliver what the politicians want, but I just found that whole announcement quite disingenuous, really, and not the way to do business, particularly with the hours and the commitment and the work that had gone into it. I find that hard. That is the truth of it.
As always, very honest answer. Thanks, Joe. I think everybody would have to concede that whatever your politics, that was not the best way of handling that particular situation. What was very strange for us sat here in Liverpool was to watch Manchester having the bullfight rather than us. That was.
Yeah, I know. I mean, all credit to Andy, because he just stuck to his guns, and as did all the leaders. They all said, hang on a minute, this was what we were asking for, was evidence-based and justified, and it was the right thing to do. And I just found that a bizarre moment in my career, really.
And as you say, they did it about 48 hours later anyway. Very strange, bizarre, as you rightly say. Good question here, I think, from Amber Greenhalgh from B&M, and a topic that I know is very close to B&M's heart. So it's about the Zero Carbon Initiative and how that ambition basically is going to be impacted in terms of the timeline, because COVID will, of course, have impacted on this. Thoughts on that, Joe?
I don't know the exact answer on the timeline. Good question, actually. I don't know. I know that we've reaffirmed that we're still, our zero carbon ambition is undaunted. We're not changing it. We are still monitoring it. You'll hear when we launch the economic investment plan, you will hear our announcement around green growth and in particular a big project around retrofit, housing retrofit, and the funding that we've secured to do that, along with some other kind of initiatives that we've got. So the ambition's undaunted. I don't know if it's going to affect the timeline. As I say, I think there was some aspects of clean air and various other things that we saw a slight improvement on, and then it's come down. But we're not renegotiating the target, so we'll look at it. And I think we're still in a discussion with government around clean air zones and actually what's going to happen with that. But we haven't negotiated. We haven't planned to change the target at all. And of course, planning up for COP in Glasgow in 2021, which we'll have a strong presence on as well. So, you know, we're not, well, there won't be kind of MIPing, will there? It won't be, I think we've kind of said that the MIPing event's unlikely. But instead, I think we'll absolutely aim to have a strong message in time for COP.
Yeah, cool. And that could be a more relevant event now that the result from over the pond there.
Yeah, I think it's become the hot ticket now, hasn't it? Because everybody thinks Biden's coming. So yeah.
Biden is on the same page, which is nice to see. Joe, I think we've run out of questions from our panelists. And listen, just a note of consolation for you, because you know, listen, I'm not going to go through the litany of disasters that you've brought with you since.
It's true. It's true.
You mentioned Mipham and the bloody, you know, the stand flying into the sea and the plane and all those sorts of experience. But I'll tell you now, I can promise you that as the returning officer for the elections next year, you will not be receiving anywhere like the sort of stick the governors of Pennsylvania, Georgia, and elsewhere to get them from Trump at the moment. So at least you can speak easy on with that knowledge, yeah?
Oh, indeed. I think I put in my timeline, you know, don't anybody ever ask me how long is this going to take ever again. Because frankly, anything less than 2 weeks, I'm doing well.
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, as always, great to see you. Lovely to see you with a smile on your face and keeping that optimistic, determined attitude going forward, which, as you say, is very Manchester. What we all needed to hear today, I'm sure. Been great to see you, but there's no substitute to a live event. And as soon as we can, we promise you, we will get Joanne Roney in a room and we will be giving her a glass of wine, a well-deserved one as well. So thanks, Joe. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Businesses in particular, you've been brilliant. We really feel your presence. Thank you, Frank. I know you've been a great kind of ally and a great supporter alongside us as a city, as have everybody. And you know, we are Manchester, aren't we? We all stand together. We all come together. And I'm not mindlessly optimistic. I'm just a girl who thinks the glass is never full enough.
Mm. Yeah. That's a great line to end with. See you soon, Joanne.
See you, everybody. See you. Good to talk to you. Bye.